Hi and welcome to Mojo Designs. Today we're going to be painting this ocean scene. So we're going to be using masking fluid, PBO drawing gum. I also use a brush cleaner. And I have these cheapo brushes. Get the sizing out of it. But I wanted to have a fine point. Now when I use drawing gum, I use a brush that is not like my black silver velvet. And I'm loading it up quite a bit. I want to work this brush cleaner, the soap, into the bristles. Then you can kind of see I twist it and I'm getting most of the soap off of there. So let's set that aside. This reference photo I pulled off of Pixby. Pretty sure it's Pixby. It's been a little bit since I've used this, so I'm gonna kind of mix it together. It is a little stinky. This is my favorite drawing gum. You can get this version in more of an odorless, but now that I have most of that, now I want to shake it. I just want to work everything back into the bottle. Basically, we're going to use a drawing gum. You can also use rubber cement, but test it on your paper. If you don't have drawing gum. You can also use a white crayon or a clear crayon to keep the white of your paper. So if you don't have drawing gum, I know that we're in some trying times, that you can use a crayon or a clear crayon and you can get this white lacy effect. So I'm just going to kind of keep that here. I'm not going to follow it, you know. I'm going to first kind of do the shoreline. I'm making this for my sweetie. He loves the beach. So this one I left kind of thick. Now the rest of this, you want to have the thinner brush, and I'm just doing kind of like some squiggles, right? You can do a honeycomb pattern. I just want this to look like seafoam. And we'll kind of see how this looks once we're done painting. So I'm just going to go through here. And there's no rhyme or reason when you're looking at the photo. There's some places that have a lot of, you know, the foam. I kind of want it more concentrated up by the shore, which this is our shore, versus back here we're going to add some drawing gum just to show the reflection of the water. Some places I'm making it thicker, some places I'm making it thinner, and that's fine. So now let's kind of start adding some of the farther apart. I miss the ocean. Grew up in Washington State where we were close to the bay. We had seafoamy shores like this all the time. And as you see, I'm not being precise now. doing this on purpose. I'm trying to be quick on purpose because I can get lost in the detail. If you love detail, you can go through here and do this little more pattern if you want more of like that honeycomb pattern that you see sometimes. And let's see, I'm going to add in some areas we can keep. So it's looking kind of random. Now we want to wait for this to dry. While we're doing that, I'm going to mix up some sand color. I'm going to use raw sienna with a touch of burnt sienna and maybe a slight touch of, what is that color? It's one of my favorite yellows. Totally escaping me right now. Quinacridone gold. And then we're going to mix up this beautiful turquoisey color. So you can do that in two ways depending on what you have. You can use a little bit of ultramarine and some phthalo green. You can use some cobalt teal and a little ultramarine. I want to use ultramarine because it is a sedimentary color and that's going to give us granulation. So that's going to give us texture. And if you notice under here, you can kind of see the sand and you get this lovely texture. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to mix up the paint. We're going to let this dry and I'll be back. So what's really important is you really want this to dry. So this is tacky. It'll go more clear. You can see over here these are dry. Where it's a little thicker, it's tacky. You don't want to paint when this drawing gum is tacky. And I just want you to notice how I didn't follow the photo, right? I'm just using this as a reference. I just kind of want to get that little lacy. I wish I could zoom in here. You can see all this little lacy detail. And that's kind of what this is representing. Now this is going to reserve the white of the paper. So that's what the drawing gum is going to do. So once this is dry and we begin painting, what we're going to find when we remove the drawing gum is all these areas are going to be stark white. We're going to go back in and we're going to do light washes of color over the top where we don't want it so stark white. Alright, so we're going to work on the sand portion while the rest is drying. And that's just because I'm impatient. Now I usually would do 2 or 3 paintings, you know, let one dry, kind of work on a couple at a time. Just because depending on the water saturation level in the paper and what you're creating, you may want to be painting at different levels of dryness depending on the effect. I'm just gonna grab, look at that beautiful raw sienna. It's just gorgeous. Now some of this we can pull out into this area here. Because if you notice through the white, you can kind of see the sand. So now, while this is still fairly wet, I want to go in with my burnt sienna and a little bit of either burnt umber or sepia, whichever. I have both in my palette. Not necessary, but I like them both. And I'm just going to charge some paint into the shoreline here. Now watercolor, remember, it always dries lighter than when applied. I'm just coming up with kind of a drier brush, and I'm just sopping up some of this extra water. Watercolor is all about controlling your water and letting go at the same time, and letting the water and pigment do what it's meant to do. And I'm not gonna do some dark at every little edge. Right, now let's move on. We're gonna start with our ultramarine in the back here, because this is where we want it to be darkest. And we may have to do a few layers, and that's okay. Now I'm going to bring in some of this cobalt teal color. And as you notice, when we're painting over the raw sienna, the sand, you can kind of see it peeking through. So you have this extra layer over top. And since we did such a thin layer of the sand in the ocean section where all the water is, it dried fairly quickly. And now as we're doing our layers over top, it's looking very similar to this. So that's always exciting. Now ultramarine, one of my all-time favorite blues. Now I'm just gonna mix in some Sleeping Beauty turquoise. Oh my gosh, that is the most gorgeous granulating color with the ultramarine. And I'm doing that because I want there to be a little bit more of a gradient blend. So this is your world. You can create whatever you'd like, as Bob Ross would say. Now see here, I'm kind of getting a little too my water is getting a little too close to there, so it's kind of bleeding, which is okay, we can fix that later. Right, here's the first layer. We're gonna let this dry and we'll be back. So while waiting for this to dry, I went back through and I charged in some pure ultramarine. What was left over on my brush, I kind of did some streaks. That's gonna also add to the depth to the painting. This is drying. You can kind of see the paper is bowing a little bit. That's okay, that's why we taped it down. It's the nature of watercolor. 100% cotton paper is what I'm using. Arches or Arches, whichever you prefer. Cold press, 140 pound. It's meant to take a lot of water. It is made out of cotton for a reason. I'm going to go back in with some raw sienna as I throw my pan around here. So we're going to go back in with a little bit of raw sienna. I just want this to have a little bit more warmth. So we're just going to go back in. As you saw, it can get very light, and that's just the nature of watercolor. So with watercolor, you don't have a ton of binders when you're using artist quality, like versus, let's say, an artist quality acrylic, where you have to have those binders with the pigment. and it reacts differently. With watercolor, you have your binder, which is usually gum arabic, and it's pure pigment, gum arabic, maybe some honey depending on the formula, whoever you're purchasing from. And that's what. So I brought out the hairdryer. So as this is drying, you can kind of see the colors are getting a little more dull. You can see all of this beautiful granulation. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use phthalo green. Phthalo green. I am going to pull in a little bit of manganese blue. And the reason I'm switching blues, you usually don't want to. Usually to make a painting cohesive, they always teach you that you want to use the same colors. I am mixing colors that are very similar, as you can see, maybe a tiny bit darker than what was laid down before. But I'm using phthalo green, and I'm also using manganese blue, not to necessarily introduce some new colors, but to mix a color that is very similar, to the cobalt teal ultramarine mixture that I've been using. We'll add some more ultramarine up to the top here. And the reason I'm using the phthalo green and the manganese blue is I'm getting that a very similar color, very similar to the cobalt teal. It's a tealy blue, but it doesn't granulate. And in some areas, I'm going to make it darker. And then in other areas, I'm going to keep it lighter. I'm going to go in, I'm just going to pull some of that color in places. And another thing that you can use is a hair dryer. And I have it on a warm or cool setting. I wouldn't do hot. So we're going to dry the paper again. Alright, so I did make sure everything is dried. A way that you can tell is if you put the back of your hand on the painting. If it's cool to the touch, that means it's not completely dry. A little tip there. So now I'm going to go through, and here's where the magic happens. We're just going to remove the drawing gum. I'm trying to do this in a way not to shake our little table here, because I don't want a shaky video. So I am going to pause. I'm going to clear all this off, and we'll be back. So I removed almost all of the drawing gum. I see I missed a couple spots here. Sorry if you can hear outside. They are grooming the yard. So as you see, this looks nothing like this. You see all this white and you're like, that doesn't look very good. It's not thin enough. I get it. Totally and completely get it. Instantly, what I would change when I do this again is I would not be as quick, and I would make sure that I did more fine line work. But we're going to make this be pretty and beautiful. And again, it was an interpretation. So now we're going to get a really watered down version of the ultramarine blue turquoisey mixture. And I just kind of want to go over some of that stark white, because when you look at a reflection in the water, you don't always have, there is not usually this stark white in the back. We're using this as an interpretation on how I'm gonna leave some of this here. I go back in, I want to add a little bit. So you can make it just really easy that way. And really this is done. Now I'm going a little overboard with the washes because I'm not a huge fan of the stark white. And not just because there's too much of it, because I didn't do a fine enough. Brush strokes with that. So I am covering most of the white up. Now usually I wouldn't do that, but that's okay. This is how we learn. So there you have it. You have one more dry time. Alright, so it is all dry. Now you could also go through here, and I'm resisting the urge, with some white, waterproof white. Bleed proof ink or white gouache. You can go through here and make it even more detailed. But for the first attempt at using this technique to do water, it's okay. We can only improve from here. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Many creative and good vibes sending your way.